Hey, I'm Paul Stevenson from VRP Rocks, and I've got a great interview with drumming legend Chris Slade. This is a man who's worked for years with ACDC, and he's got some fun stories from his time in the band, including what it was like when Axl Rose took over from Brian Johnson. He's also worked in The Firm alongside Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers, 2 albums with them. He spent a year with Pink Floyd's David Gilmour. He was with Manfred Mann's Earth Band for 7 years, Blinded by the Light and all that. Plus, he's worked with so many other greats as well. He played with Gary Moore and Frankie Miller and Asia and Uriah Heep and Gary Newman. And if you go back into the 60s, he played on so many records with Tom Jones, hit songs, hit albums too. So you're going to hear some of the best of his stories from his career right now. Let's go back to the early 70s then, because this is a rock channel. I know you had a lot of success with Tom Jones, fellow Welshman, in the 60s and stuff. But let's start with
Yeah,
Manfred Mann's Earth Band then. I mean, how was that band initially sold to you? Because Manfred Mann had come out of a kind of pop era, hadn't he, with Do Wah Diddy and Mighty Quinn and things,
yeah.
and then there was the almost jazz chapter 3. So how was the Earth Band, this next phase of Manfred Mann? How was that band sold to you?
Well, I'd worked on drums in chapter 3, and Manfred knew my phone number. He phoned me and said, "I'm going to form a new band. I know this guitarist from Australia, singer guitarist. You know a bass player?" Which I did. So that's how Colin Paddington joined Earth Band, and that was band for many years. The four of us. Manfred's name was not great in the business. In other words, they expected the pop band,
Yeah.
which was not very good, to be very honest. Even Manfred says that. We won't go on stage. And he wanted like a more proggy type band. Um, but what happened was we had a few hit singles, which one of them was Joybringer, actually. And we Earth Band went from that, and suddenly we were in America, and this journalist gave us Bruce Springsteen's first album, which had bombed, to be honest. It's a multi-million selling album now, but Greetings from Asbury Park, when it first came out, absolutely just went down the tubes. So this journalist gave us Bruce's album, or the E Street Band's album. So anyway, Manfred got this Greetings from Asbury Park album, and the song Blinded by the Light is on it, but it's completely different because it's not a pop version. It's like a shuffle version that Bruce did. Blinded by the Light. Very jolly. And I don't think Bruce likes it, but Manfred turned it into this sort of pop song that it became. And we thought it was really good. We didn't know it was going to do what it was going to do. We thought it was good, of a standard for Earth Band. And it became this multi-zillion selling album all around the world. And we were surprised by that. And we ended up, where we'd done it a few times in America, we ended up headlining tours in America, stuff like that. We'd done it before, just before Blinded by the Light, we were doing that. So we were fairly successful as a band. And then that recording just topped it off, and everything went crazy. And then after a couple of years of that, Manfred said, "I'm going to retire because I've had enough." He's still going now. He's 88 and he's still playing with Earth Band. He sat on the sofa for about 2 years, then decided he wanted to get up and do something. So he did retire for a couple of years. But we wanted to keep going. We musicians.
Yeah.
Mick Rodgers, actually the guitarist and singer, is still with him.
He is, yeah.
So but we didn't go back with Manfred. We concentrated on our own careers, if you like. And I think I went then to Uriah Heep. Once Earth Band finished, I was in Uriah Heep for a couple of years. I think it was 81. And did an album with them called Conquest.
Well, let me just jump in here then, Chris, because obviously you worked with incredible. You mentioned Uriah Heep. There was Frankie Miller, Gary Newman was there as well. But I just want to take you on a little bit to David Gilmour. And before we speak about David, was it true that you got offers from David and from Jimmy Page pretty much at the same time? Was it on the same day or very close to the same day?
Same day.
Same day.
Yeah, Gilmour rang about midday and said, "Oh, it's David Gilmour." I had met him, and he said, "I'm putting a band together and I'd like you to play drums." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic, Dave. It's amazing. But I'm working with Mick Ralphs of Bad Company." And he said, "Oh yeah, Mick's doing it too." So that became Gilmour's band for a whole year on the road with everyone. It was great. It was a great time. And then, so when I said yes to Gilmour, I put the phone down. I said to the missus, let's go down the pub to celebrate. I'm going on the road with David Gilmour. It's like,
Why
to
not?
me, it was a big, big deal, which of course it is. So I went down the pub, had a couple of pints and lunch. I'll point that out. And came back from the pub, ring, ring. Hello, Stevie Page here. It's like, what the? George, I know it's you winding me up. No. It really is Stevie Page. Me and Paul Rodgers are putting a band together, and we'd like you to play drums. And I thought, honesty is the best policy. And so I said, Jim, you won't believe this, but hour and a half ago, I said yes to David Gilmour to a tour. And he said, how long is it going to be then? I said, well, it's going to be about 3 months, which is all it was at that time. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. Well, nice to speak to Jimmy Page, And there was silence from him for a few seconds. And he said, that's okay. We'll wait. I said,
wow.
Unbelievable. He said, we're in no hurry. And we'll start it up when you get back off the road. So they ended up waiting, him and Paul, for like 9-10 months.
Incredible.
Because the Gilmour tour kept getting extended.
You're going, yeah.
I think that was the first tour he had done. He'd done albums before, but the first tour. So he went and we played sort of Floyd stuff as well as his new stuff from the About Face album. And, so it kept getting extended and extended. And in the end, I think Pagey and Paul waited for like probably a full year before I was able to join them. I kept in touch with him, of course. Say, go to the States next or something like that, Sorry. Well, don't worry, man. Just let me know what's going on, which was amazing. And it turned into the film.
Yep.
And it was great. And people come up to me even now and say, this is my favorite album, with a firm album. And like it's head and shoulders, as far as they're concerned, above even Led Zeppelin, or Bad Company, which I find incredible. And
honestly, a lot of the stuff you talk about, Chris, is incredible. I mean, the fact that you're in the middle of a tug of war between David Gilmour, Mick Ralphs, and you've got Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers over here. I mean, that's insane. And the fact that the two of them held off for so long showed that they really wanted you. When there's so many drummers out there, they could have picked any other drummer, but they waited for you. That must have made you feel incredible.
Well, I couldn't believe it. I remember taking the phone away from my head and looking at it, like, what? It's Jimmy Page saying he'll wait for me. Wow. It really was, so I went back down the pub.
I don't blame you. In terms of Jimmy Page, then, did you meet earlier? Because Jimmy played on one of Tom Jones's hits as well, didn't he? So did you guys meet like many years back?
No, I'd never met him before.
Okay.
I'd met Gilmour before, but I hadn't met Pagey. Yes, he did. He played on everybody's records in the
Yes,
60s.
that's true.
That's him on the Kinks, gang, gadang, da gang, gang. That's Pagey. I asked him and he said, yes, that's me. So, I mean, he's played with everybody as a session guy, and he was the top session guy. And I did a Tom Jones album called 13 Smash Hits, and the bass player was John Paul Jones.
Ah.
So there's no credits on those old albums, so you would never know. But we were having a tea break, John Paul Jones and the band, because in those days you had to have a tea break. It was part of the. So the brass players, as brass players do, were drinking something a bit stronger than tea. So so they said, "Oh, JP," because everybody knew each other in those days, because they were always on the same sessions together. Oh, JP, what are you doing now then, mate? And John Paul goes, well, I'm thinking of putting together a band with Pagey. Oh, is that right then, JP? What are you going to call it then? Well, we thought we'd call it Led Zeppelin. Brass players spitting whiskey everywhere, going, that's great, laughing their socks off because it was going to be called Led Zeppelin. Because everybody knew the joke. I don't know, I'm sure everybody does. How did you do last night? Oh, we went down like a lead balloon, which apparently changed. Keith Moon changed it to Led Zeppelin. So, because he was going to be the drummer originally with Zeppelin. So he was thought of, at least, put it that way. But, you can't possibly do better than Bonham.
Absolutely.
It would be impossible to do better than that.
So you mentioned the firm there and the fact that the record's still held up in high regard, and the fact that you worked with not just Tony Franklin, but the likes of Paul Rodgers and Jimmy Page. What was it like being in the studio around those two then? Because they were obviously absolute legends and crafting new music and things like that. What was it like working with those guys in the studio?
Well, I knew Paul from 71 when I did a tour. He was with Free.
Yeah.
And we did a tour of Australia. Earth Band did a tour of Australia. And Free were opening the bill, can you believe? They would open the show, then Earth Band would go on, then Deep Purple were top of the bill. And we did a few months tour, I think, with that lineup. So I knew Paul from then, 71. And Pagey was just, he's an ordinary guy, I know people go, oh dear, and they would probably die if they stood next to him or something. But he's an ordinary guy, and he's very good at what he does. Of course, he was the top session man in Britain for the whole of the 60s, and then he stopped doing that and went to this little band called Led Zeppelin. So
I think I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, it was great. And I've always made a point of getting on with people. That's why I've worked as long as I have. You just got to get on with people. Yeah. You can't be on a bus together or a plane or whatever it is and have an argument, or, you can have disagreements about certain things, but, you can't hold a grudge or anything like that, because it'll show. At least to yourself, it will. And we just did the album. Tony Franklin was a great bass player, great fretless player, and he played keyboards and he also sang. So great asset to the band, any band actually.
Yeah,
the fretless monster. He's he calls himself that.
That's it.
That's his handle. Yeah,
the fretless monster. That's it.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. So I wasn't overawed. None of us were overawed. And Gilmour was the same. You can't with Gilmour. He's such a straightforward, what you see is what you get sort of guy. Very intelligent, knows exactly what he wants, and can articulate that, whereas some people can't.
Yeah, very true.
They go, well, do that jugger jugger thing then, something like that. So it's it's people are people, the way I see life.
As the famous song goes, indeed. So you mentioned like Gilmour and Jimmy Page. You worked with Gary Moore as well, another incredible guitarist. And I think it was while you were with Gary Moore that you were spotted by the ACDC guys. So tell me about that. How did you join ACDC? And can you remember your audition? Did you have to do an audition for them?
I remember it very well. Yes, I did an audition. They told me after that I was number 100.
Oh, wow.
They told me after. They didn't tell me before. That would have been... And they were all top drummers all around the world. So they held auditions in America and in Britain. And drummers would ring up and say, look, don't tell my band, but I really want to try out with you guys. Because everybody wanted to be in ACDC. Honestly, I know it sounds a bit strange now, but they did. People were queuing up,
yeah, of course,
to join the band in whatever capacity. And they were and still are one of the biggest bands in the world. They certainly put on a show, a great show, which is what they're doing right now, actually.
Yep.
And I know the drummer they got now. I used to know him in California when I lived in California. And I knew that he would do a great job for ACDC. And people took that the wrong way. They said, oh, he's bitter. He's bitter. Listen to what he's saying. And I was saying, well, I know, Matt. I know he's going to be great. That's all I was saying. And it's like, well, listen how bitter he is about that. And I wasn't bitter at all. I was very pleased for Matt, actually, because he was with Alanis Morissette originally. And, I know he's a good player. He's a studio player. And he'll do everything that Angus wants him to do. If he wants him to channel Phil Rudd, he will. The same as I did. Channel, I say, to the trolls. Channel. In other words, try to play like Phil Rudd, and keep the kick drum as simple as you possibly can, which is what Phil does. So, the first time around, I didn't have to channel so much, but the second time around, I did. So, again, it's just getting on with people and doing your job.
It is indeed.
Doing the job you're paid for.
It is indeed. And in terms of ACDC, I mean, there's loads of highlights from your time there. But one I want to ask you about is when you went to Russia, you went to Moscow and you played that huge festival. Was it 1 million people or something there when you guys performed? I mean, what do you remember from those days, from that event, from that whole thing?
Well, the crowd just went over the horizon. It was in an unused airfield in the middle of Moscow. And it was a free show, so you can imagine. And there was over 1 million people there. CNN counted, or at least estimated, they had a hot air balloon above the field. And CNN estimated there to be over 1 million people. So, that was awesome, to say the least. And they had, the PA was staggered all the way along the crowd as it went deeper and deeper, further and further away. So that everybody got the same sound when it was happening and not a delay, And it was fantastic. Well, ACDC is always fantastic, in fact. They never have a bad show. And it's always exciting. And Angus is always on top form, even when he feels awful. I've seen him do it with cold and everything.
Delivers, yeah.
But he always stumps up. He's always the guy in the schoolboy suit, playing guitar. And it's great. And the band is great. And they've stuck to their guns. They always play their style right at the beginning. Some people might think, "Oh, we've got to do something different." I think a journalist said to Angus once, I was there, he said, "What do you say to people who say you've done 20 albums and they all sound the same?" Angus said, that's terrible for you to say that. That is just awful. I mean, 20 albums, they all sound the same. He said, we've done 21 albums and they all sound the same.
It's knowing what you do, doing it right, and the people love it. So why not?
Yeah. And, they were great. Malcolm was the backbone because he was the engine room. He was a genius at rhythm guitar. And I mean that. I've played with many rhythm guitarists. And he specialized in rhythm. He was a great player, actually soloing also, but his rhythm was impeccable. I've never seen anything like it. His timing, he never missed a beat. He was always on time, exactly on time, like a drummer. And he made my job so easy because all you do is follow Malcolm.
That sounds good to me. Thunderstruck, we've got to mention it. You've got it on your new record as well. It's a huge song. Again, one of the band's highlights to this very day, off the album The Razor's Edge that you did. It's a song that you guys obviously play as well with the timeline. So why is that song that you hold so dear? I mean, what is it about that track itself?
You've got to do Thunderstruck. It's iconic. It's such a great song and such a great arrangement. You can't change that. And people, punters, the crowd, the people who pay to come and see you they want Back in Black and they want Thunderstruck. Anything else is welcome, but you've got to do those two songs. And they're just so iconic.
It was. It was an absolute phenomenon, wasn't it? It was absolutely crazy. And just to finish off, just one last question about your time with ACDC. Brian left the band for a short period and was replaced by Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses, famously. And what happened there? Because on the outside, it seems a bit of a strange mix, perhaps, with Axl and ACDC. So how was it within the band?
It was great. He turned out to be a great guy, telling jokes, telling stories, all sorts of, and he took it very seriously. He used to warm up for 2 hours every night before the concert and warm down for 1 hour. And I know that because I was in the room next to him. So it's like, oh, Axl's off again. There you go. And he, I'd heard all the horror stories. Of course, haven't we all? But he turned out to be, I shook his hand and thought, this guy's all right. Strangely, why do I think that? And then he started singing. It was like, wow, this guy has a voice. I didn't know he had that voice. I'd only ever heard him sing Guns N' Roses. But that voice that he has, that instrument he has, is just phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not Brian Johnson. He wasn't even trying to be Brian Johnson. Again, the trolls are going, he's not Brian. Nobody can be Brian. Brian is Brian, and he has his own voice, and it's unique, and that's the way it goes. Axl had a different approach, and that's all. I'm not saying one is better than the other, because music is not a competition. But journalists always try to put words in my mouth. I said in an interview once that I heard the band better with my in-ear monitors than I've ever heard any band before in my life. And they wrote down, then they made the headlines. Oh, Slade thinks that Axl is better than Brian. It sounds better with Axl. journalist just to get headlines, and it's not what I said at all. I was talking about my in-ear monitors. So, always a bit wary of journalists, aren't I? So,
You should be. Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for telling me your stories. Best of luck with the Chris Slade Timeline, the new album, Timescape, out on July 19th. I urge everyone to get a copy. Double CD, plenty of hits, plenty of originals on there. So thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for the plug. I shall wear it always.